Alright everyone, so Ukraine is an incredibly corrupt country, and the media, in particular the Western media, is trying to downplay this. They're trying to hide the fact that Ukraine is incredibly corrupt, and they're firmly on the side of Ukraine in this war between Russia and Ukraine. But I'm going to look at some countries that are actually less corrupt than Ukraine, just to show you how corrupt Ukraine is. But first I want to show you this tweet from Candace Owens. Received an email from the New York Times asking for comment regarding my advancing ideas that Ukraine is a corrupt country, similar to Russian state TV. I replied informing them that I actually got my ideas from the New York Times and provided them with links to their past articles. So the New York Times were cooking up a hit piece on Candace Owens, claiming that she's spreading Russian propaganda similar to Russian state TV, you see, because she's claiming that Ukraine is a corrupt country. And she told them that, well, she got her information from them, the New York Times. So let's look at the email that they sent. Hi there, I'm writing from the New York Times. We're working on a story about Russian messaging that includes some of your comments. We note that you advanced the idea that Ukraine was a corrupt country, which matched comments we've seen from Russian state media. I'm wondering if you have any context or further comment to add about this comparison. We're finalizing the story today. So basically, they're giving her this pathetic heads up saying we're doing a hit piece on you, and if you got any comment to our hit piece where we're gonna compare you to Russian state propaganda and your assertion that Ukraine is corrupt. So this was Candace's response. I'm very confused by this email. I learned about the idea that Ukraine was a corrupt country from the New York Times. You guys have covered the corruption of Ukraine extensively for years. As just one example, here is a piece from the New York Times editorial board entitled Ukraine's Unyielding Corruption. I educated myself about both the neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine and the unyielding corruption by reading your newspaper, not Russian state media. Is there something specific I said that was different from what you guys have written in the past? So she's calling out the New York Times, and she's basically saying that the New York Times have been saying themselves that Ukraine is incredibly corrupt. And she links to articles from other sources, The Hill, The Daily Beast, The Guardian. So let's have a look at this Guardian article here. Revealed, anti-oligarch Ukrainian president's offshore connections. Volodymyr Zelensky has railed against politicians hiding wealth offshore, but failed to disclose links to BFI firm. The Pandora Papers leaked to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and shared with The Guardian as part of a global investigation, however, suggests Zelensky is rather similar to his predecessors. The leaked documents suggest he had or has a previously undisclosed stake in an offshore company, which he appears to have secretly transferred to a friend weeks before winning the presidential vote. Zelensky has not commented on the claim, despite extensive attempts by The Guardian and its media partners to reach him. His spokesman messaged, "Won't be an answer." So he's refusing to comment on this allegation. So before becoming president, Zelensky declared some of his private assets, and it lists some things that he declared. But the Pandora Papers show further offshore assets that Zelensky appears not to have revealed. So he's hiding all these assets he has abroad. And Volodymyr Zelensky, he has talked about, getting rid of corruption in Ukraine, but he's just as corrupt as his predecessors. He's an incredibly corrupt guy in a very corrupt country. So Candace Owens is correct. The Guardian is correct. The New York Times is correct. Even though now they're trying to backtrack and they're trying to demonize Candace Owens and they're trying to link Candace Owens with Russian state propaganda. Disgraceful behavior by the New York Times. Now here is transparency.org, Transparency International, the global coalition against corruption. And they have a corruption perceptions index. And they have countries here ranked. And on top we see, not too surprisingly, Denmark, Finland, Nordic countries, New Zealand, Norway, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, the Netherlands and Luxembourg and Germany. So these are the top 10. So not too surprising, a lot of Northern European countries as well as Singapore and New Zealand. So these are the top ranked countries. These are the standard countries when it comes to corruption and getting rid of it. So where does Ukraine stand in this list? Well, let's scroll down, and we actually have to scroll down for quite a long time here to find Ukraine because Ukraine is so incredibly corrupt. It's way down the list. We have to keep going here. And there it is. Ranked 122 out of 180. So this doesn't have every country. It has 180, which is most of them. So there's a few missing. But Ukraine ranks 122 out of 180. So there are 121 countries less corrupt than Ukraine. And it gets a score of 32 out of 100. And so I'm going to look at some countries that rank higher than Ukraine. Countries that are less corrupt than Ukraine. And the first one I'm going to look at is Jamaica. So Jamaica has had one of the highest murder rates in the world for many years, according to UN estimates. Also, many Jamaicans are hostile towards LGBT and intersex people. And mob attacks against gay people have been reported. Numerous high-profile dancehall and reggae artists have produced songs featuring explicitly homophobic lyrics. Male homosexuality is illegal and punishable by imprisonment. So bad on human rights, terrible on crimes, one of the highest murder rates in the world, lots of gang violence, and yet Jamaica is less corrupt than Ukraine. Next, we have Cuba. The Cuban government has been accused of numerous human rights abuses, including torture, arbitrary imprisonment, so just rounding up people for no reason, throwing them in prison, unfair trials, extrajudicial executions, so killing people without due legal process. The government represses nearly all forms of political dissent. Cubans are systematically denied basic rights to free expression, association, assembly, privacy, movement, and due process of law. And this communist dictatorship Cuba is still less corrupt than Ukraine, apparently. Cuba had the second highest number of imprisoned journalists of any nation in 2008. China has had the highest, and we'll be looking at China in a few minutes. 40 maximum security prisons, 30 minimum security prisons, and over 200 work camps. And yet, Cuba is less corrupt than Ukraine. Can you believe that? Next we have Sierra Leone, which I believe is the poorest country in this list. Male same-sex sexual activity is illegal and imprisonment for life is possible. So you could be thrown in prison for life if you're gay. Excessive police brutality is also a frequent problem. Protesters have been killed by security forces, as have prison rioters. 30 inmates and one correction officer were killed in an incident in Pademba Road Prison. Multiple allegations were made during the COVID-19 lockdown period of police attacking people trying to obtain basic necessities. Children who have been forced to be part of war have experienced severe mental and emotional damage in Sierra Leone. So there was a civil war in Sierra Leone back at the end of the 20th century. Children have been forced to take part, and of course, because of that, they have severe mental and emotional damage. Those who survived, of course, and many of those kids were killed. Medical care is not readily accessible, with doctors and hospitals out of reach for many villagers. While free health care may be provided in some villages, the medical staff is poorly paid and sometimes charged for their services, taking advantage of the fact that villagers are not aware of their right to free medical care. So in theory, medical care is free in Sierra Leone, but because the doctors are poorly paid, they actually charge people money when they shouldn't be. They should be paid by the government, but the government pays them so little that they actually charge people, and that's illegal because free medical care is supposed to be a right in Sierra Leone. So massive corruption there, even by doctors, medical staff. Unbelievable. Mental health care in Sierra Leone is almost non-existent. Many sufferers try to cure themselves with the help of traditional healers. So the water supply in Sierra Leone is characterized by limited access to safe drinking water, despite efforts by the government and numerous non-governmental organizations. Access has not much improved since the end of Sierra Leone civil war in 2002, stagnating at about 50% and even declining in rural areas. So not only is water supply really bad, it's actually getting worse in some areas. And, this lack of basic resources is purely down to corruption. People at the top just making money at the expense of the regular people. And yet Sierra Leone, my friends, is less corrupt than Ukraine. And next we have China, another communist authoritarian government. The Chinese government has been variously described as communist and socialist, but also as authoritarian and corporatist, with heavy restrictions in many areas, most notably against free access to the internet, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, the right to have children, free formation of social organizations, and freedom of religion. So just so many basic human rights are just not given to the Chinese people. Even the right to have children. Remember, China had the one-child policy where you could only have one child. So just unbelievable corruption, and yet it's not as corrupt as Ukraine. The Chinese state is regularly accused of large-scale repression and human rights abuses in Tibet and Xinjiang, including violent police crackdowns and religious suppression throughout the Chinese nation. At least 1 million members of China's Muslim Uyghur minority have been detained in mass detention camps, termed vocational education and training centres, aimed at changing the political thinking of detainees, their identities, and their religious beliefs. Actions including political indoctrination, torture, physical and psychological abuse, forced sterilisation, sexual abuse, and forced labour are common in these facilities. Just unbelievable stuff in China. Genocide and crimes against humanity has been perpetrated by China against the Uyghurs. This is according to Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State of the US. The Global Slavery Index estimated that in 2016, more than 3.8 million people were living in conditions of modern slavery. In 2019, a study called for the mass retraction of more than 400 scientific papers on organ transplantation because of fears the organs were obtained unethically from Chinese prisons. Taking organs out of Chinese prisoners, again, just unbelievable stuff. Now, China denies all this, but there's ample evidence that a lot of this is happening. Let's move on to Saudi Arabia because there's a link here with China and Saudi Arabia. In February 2019, Crown Prince Mohammed defended China's Xinjiang re-education camps for Uyghur Muslims. China has the right to carry out anti-terrorism and de-extremization work for its national security. So Saudi Arabia, a Muslim country, is defending China's treatment of Muslims in China. Crazy. Tensions have escalated between Saudi Arabia and its allies after the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi from the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. So this was a journalist that was murdered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. So killing journalists is high up in the agenda of the Saudi monarchy. According to the Iraqi Prime Minister, Saudi Arabia, along with Qatar, provided political, financial and media support to terrorists against the Iraqi government. Similarly, Assad of Syria noted that the sources of the extreme ideology of terrorists, ISIS and other extremist groups are the Wahhabism that has been supported by the royal family of Saudi Arabia. So Assad is accusing Saudi Arabia of being the source for the extremism of ISIS. According to Sir William Patey, former British ambassador to Saudi Arabia, the kingdom funds mosques throughout Europe that have become hotbeds of extremism. So strong links between Saudi Arabia and terrorism. And of course, there's the human rights abuses. The Saudi government, which mandates Muslim and non-Muslim observance of Sharia law under the absolute rule of the House of Saud, have been accused of and denounced by various international organizations and governments for violating human rights within the country. Security forces continue to torture and ill-treat detainees to extract confessions to be used as evidence against them at trial. Saudi Arabian law does not recognize sexual orientations, religious freedom, with the public practice of non-Muslim religions actively prohibited, and regularly engages in capital punishment, including public executions by beheading. Saudi women face discrimination in many aspects of their lives, such as the justice system, and under the male guardianship system are effectively treated as legal minors. So the women are treated like children under the law. Although they make up 70% of those in universities, women make up just 5% of the workforce, the lowest proportion in the world. The treatment of women has been referred to as sex segregation and gender apartheid. Saudi Arabia is a notable destination country for men and women trafficked for the purposes of slave labour and commercial sexual exploitation. And yet, Saudi Arabia is less corrupt than Ukraine. And the final country I want to look at is Belarus, Ukraine's neighbour. And as we know, Belarus is basically Russia's puppy. The leader, Lukashenko, he's in the pocket of Vladimir Putin. In a formal sense, Belarus is a presidential republic enjoying a separation of powers, government by president and the National Assembly. In reality, Belarus is an autocracy where power is concentrated in the hands of the president. Elections are not free and judicial independence is weak. So, in theory, it's a democracy, but in reality, it's ruled by this guy, Alexander Lukashenko. Belarus has often been described as Europe's last dictatorship by some media outlets, politicians and authors due to its authoritarian government. And yet, Belarus is less corrupt than Ukraine. And more human rights and corruption here, human rights violations and its persecution of non-governmental organizations, journalists, minorities, opposition politicians. Lukashenko announced a new law in 2014 that will prohibit kolkhoz workers from leaving their jobs at will. A change of job and living location will require permission from governors. The law was compared with serfdom by Lukashenko himself. So, you're not allowed to freely leave your job in Belarus for these kolkhoz workers. And yet, Belarus, according to the statistics, is less corrupt than Ukraine. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to go through these 6 countries I just looked at. So remember, Ukraine has 32 points. It's ranked 122. So let's go through the countries I just looked at. So let's have a look at these countries quickly. Jamaica has a score of 44 and it's ranked 70 in the world, higher than Ukraine. It's less corrupt than Ukraine. Next we have Cuba, ranked 64 in the world with a score of 46, much better than Ukraine. And here we have Sierra Leone with a score of 34, ranked 115, so slightly better than Ukraine, but there you go, it's better than Ukraine. And here we have China with a score of 45, ranked 66 in the world, much better than Ukraine. And here we have Saudi Arabia with a whopping score of 53, ranked 52 in the world, way better than Ukraine, way less corrupt. And finally we have Belarus with a score of 41, ranked 82 in the world, way better than Ukraine, about 40 places higher than Ukraine. There's 40 countries in between Belarus and Ukraine, and yet Belarus is this terrible corrupt country under the leadership of Lukashenko, the dictator, and Ukraine, the wonderful democracy with Zelensky as president, freely elected, is ranked way lower than Belarus in terms of corruption. So there you go, guys. Ukraine is incredibly corrupt, and don't let the media fool you in this. Ukraine is a horribly corrupt country, and the whole Hunter Biden scandal and his cushy job as a director of a Ukrainian company getting, $60,000 a month or something like that for being on the board. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Ukraine is incredibly corrupt, and don't forget that. So be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, like, share. Let me know what you think about Ukraine as a country. Let me know what you think about corruption in general, especially in Ukraine. And let me know what you think about the mainstream media trying to cover for Ukraine and try and make out that it's like this wonderful democratic country with no corruption. So until next time, bye for now.